Everyone, I'm Jennifer Porter, Program Officer with the Vista Hermosa Foundation, and today I'm here with Pierre Noel, Executive Director of the Haiti Development Institute. So Pierre, to start, I think we might address what's on everyone's minds right now with the situation in Haiti. I wonder if you could give us an update on what's going on, what are the current needs, what are the concerns, and maybe tell us a little bit about HDI.
Sure. It's good to be with you, Jennifer, for this conversation. The thing is, this right now, Haiti, especially the South Peninsula, is going through a very hard time, and the timing of it certainly could not have been actually more difficult, because this is actually coming in at during the time when the South had been disconnected to the rest of the country for months. Also, it's coming in at a time when the political and instability and discourse has really put the country and the economy somewhat on a lockdown for months as well, if not a year or more. The other thing also is we're looking at the hurricane season, and we're also looking at a community that has been decimated just 5 years before with Hurricane Matthews. And this is where we're having this devastating earthquake of a magnitude even bigger than what we saw in Port-au-Prince in 2010. So this is a very difficult time right now for our partners in the South. The very immediate needs right now really are around temporary housing for people who have lost pretty much everything. You're also looking at need for potable water, need for food, immediately some hygiene kits, also needs. But on our end, we're also looking at what exactly is needed to get life back up. And by life, really, we're talking around the dignity. How do you rebuild to support the dignity of rural life? The difference mostly between what took place in 2010 and what's going on now is this earthquake actually is in a very much rural area. There are a couple of city centers, large city centers in Lekai and Jeremy in that mix, but for the most part, we're looking at a vast population of producers and also a vast population of rural life. And rural life in Haiti, the Haiti Development Institute actually is created on the belief that this is the backbone of the country, and the people in the countryside represent somewhat the very soul and holder of our culture and everything else. So part of the work that we're looking forward to do is also to think about how does the reconstruction keep in mind the need to make sure that it's culturally competent, and also you get people who are used to doing everything on their own and everything by themselves back up and going. You're building livelihoods, getting livestock back in those communities. And the informal market is very big in those places because people live off of what they produce. So we are very much looking to see a different way in terms of responding to the earthquake from what we saw in 2010.
Thanks, Pierre. And I know that the Haiti Development Institute really came out of a relief fund from 2010. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you all made that leap from relief funding, from relief grant making to community development to capacity building for organizations, and what led to that transition for you?
Well, that's a great point. the Haiti fund was created immediately after the 2010 earthquake, just to support really the Haitian American community here that was reeling from the earthquake, and then also providing support directly in Haiti. But there are a couple of things that we learned along the way that really suscited this new life somewhat. One, decentralization was key for us. We knew that because the bulk of the population, still two-thirds, still live in the countryside, there was an opportunity to make sure that we can bring resources to them, and that we also can make sure that we can democratize access to resources in those communities. And along the way, we learned that capacity building for local organizations, for local leaders, is essential to changing the narrative around Haiti and around resources getting into those communities. And also, we learned that collaboration and coordination and the space for conversation is very much deeply important to actually bring change that's transformative in the community, because it leads to participation and inclusion, and also allows for equity to be built for people to have a stake in that. So that's really the pillars upon which the Haiti Development Institute was created, except we made sure to make sure that it's actually created in Haiti and serve as an institution that would support development in Haiti from the ground up, and making sure also that we could begin to do away with some of the excuses that actually plagued the response in 2010, and having a different way to deal with for philanthropy to be more effective. Having said all of that, I think one of the things that interests me is to hear how your journey to actually the work in Haiti as it relates to the Vista Hermosa Foundation.
Yeah, thanks. So the Vista Hermosa Foundation, this is a story that starts long before I joined the foundation. Vista Hermosa started in Haiti in the early 90s, in 93, 95, working with an organization called Beyond Borders. And it wasn't because there was any specific draw to Haiti, it was a personal connection with the organization. This organization was working on literacy projects for children in Port-au-Prince. Pretty small, pretty narrow kind of focus. But as we worked with them, as we started asking questions, as they started asking questions about why aren't these children in school? Why is there a need for this literacy project? Tracing it back and seeing, okay, so these children are Restavek, they're in domestic slavery, they don't have access to school. So why are they there? Why did this happen? And so you trace it back once more to those sending communities, and you go to rural communities and you ask, why are parents sending their children away? Why is this happening? These parents want the best for their children. They don't, there's no malicious intent. There's nothing happening there. So you have to ask questions about why, what's the circumstance? And when you learn that the circumstance is because families in rural communities, for all the reasons you've just listed, disenfranchised because of centralization of the government and of aid, because of limited economic opportunities, because of environmental degradation that impacts people's ability to farm and to create sustainable livelihoods that way, because of the lack of access to education and infrastructure in rural areas, and for some cases, for parents who themselves had suffered from violence and from the Restavek system, who didn't have necessarily the emotional tools to meet the needs of their children. And so these are parents who want to do the best they can by their children, and the only avenue they saw open to them was to send their children to wealthier people in the city. Of course, not intending that their child would then not actually have access to these resources. And as we journeyed with Beyond Borders on this route from, I think I froze for a second. Did I? Okay, sorry. As we as we traveled with Beyond Borders along this route to go further and further upstream to ask questions about the whole picture for rural communities in Haiti, it changed the way we really thought about funding and about community and about development in Haiti and about community-led development in Haiti. And today, our mission is really about healing disconnection. Our goal is to heal the roots of human connection. And those 4 roots of human connection for us are about individuals, that individuals feel that they have a sense of identity, that they're whole, that they have a sense of value in themselves, they have a vision for their future. Heal connections to others, that people feel a sense of accountability and responsibility in their family, in their communities. Heal people's sense of connection to spirituality, to God, to their faith. And then heal people's sense of connection to the earth, to creation. And so in Haiti, where we are now is really thinking about how do we heal, what are those disconnections, and how do we help communities heal those connections in the realm of mindful leadership, right? Supporting the voices of rural Haitians to have autonomy and control over where, and the vision of where their communities are going, to support farmers, right? That they might have a healthy relationship with their land and they have access to the tools that they need and they have relationships to one another, and to support healthy families, that Haitian parents can see the vision for their children and can meet that vision, right? And to feel really empowered in their ability to be parents and to create healthy families. And so this is really one of the reasons why we started working with the Haiti Development Institute, because of your leadership, because of the way that you approach listening to communities and listening to what rural communities are really saying, what their vision is. And so I wonder, Pierre, if you could talk about, for you, what does success look like in Haiti? What is your vision of impact?
For us, actually, to going back to some of the points, we also have have actually had this very long-term partnership with Beyond Borders also, and we very much believe that one of the things that will bring change in Haiti is leadership and also institutions. That's why capacity building is very important to us, because we believe that given the skills, the resources, the connections, and the spaces for conversations, rural communities and rural leaders across Haiti could actually bring their communities forward. When leaders are rooted and have the stake in their communities, they actually are able to create, to have the conversations with their community and engage the communities in around conversations for transformation in those communities. And when they do that, they begin to create institutions in those communities that would begin to have the ability to call them to order. That's why for us, when we're looking at building capacity and success for us, it's not just about whether or not the organization has the capacity. Certainly, part of our work is building the capacity of the leaders individually to know what it is required of them as leaders to not only lead their organization, but also to know specifically what are the skills needed, whether it's in financial management, project development, project delivery, but also account advocacy. How do you advocate change and public policy in your community? We've seen examples of that over the last 2 years, when communities have been locked altogether. You have farmers losing a full harvest because the woods have been locked. They can't get their harvest to market. But for the most part, these communities these woods, they were locked to think about policies that dealt with politics in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. whereas oftentimes these same communities lack access to potable water, access to electricity, access to quality education, but the roads are never blocked for things within those communities that actually these leaders have stake in. So part of that, our work is actually thinking about beyond just just the national politics, but it's about building communities. And to get there, you need strong leaders and strong institutions. And with that, the people will be enlisted as part of the conversation. It will drive participation, and in the end, also you would have communities that are engaged. For us, when we make a grant, when we come in for capacity building, it's a way to leverage everything we got. We bring the capacity building, we bring the grant making, so that because if you have an organization that is capable, it needs resources to deliver. It also needs the accompaniment continually from HDI and others, so that they can continue to actually bring their community together to actually develop the vision and also to plan the community forward so that the children can begin to build confidence in the next phase. So in having said all of that, what we're looking for is not just at an individual level for success or at a project level. We'll look at it at the community level also, and also so vertically, horizontally, and across generations. But principally, we also think about whether or not the organizations we're supporting, they think about these things in these wide lenses as well, so that it's not just about accessing resources to run a project, but it's also how do I run a project that would serve as an echelon to actually getting a community together for conversations that would actually lead to more to success, but success for all, because there is a shared vision that that is being pushed forward. But I also, I mean, I'd like to turn back this back to you. How do you, as a foundation, look at success?
Yeah, and Pierre, I think you touched on something really important, that success is long-term. It's not something that can be measured necessarily in 1-year grant cycles or even 2-year grant cycles. I'm just thinking this morning on the heels of the earthquake, where some of our partners in Lakai, I'm thinking about COFED, Communities Organizing for Haitian Engagement and Development, and we've been with them since 2010, and early in 2010 we were supporting kind of training work, and now we get photos of community nurses, young women who grew up in this neighborhood, in this community of Lagao, who were supported by COFED, who had that kind of engagement in the community, who are now leaders, who are there responding to the earthquake and responding to the needs of their community in this moment. And I think a lot about what success looks like in terms of community development, and we don't necessarily have the power to stop crises like earthquakes or hurricanes, right? Through work with farmers, we might be able to change the impacts of climate change, but we're never going to be able to end a crisis, to prevent crises altogether. And so part of the success is, as you say, thinking in this long term, thinking about communities that are spaces of care and engagement where people feel like they're a part of that community, they have a role to play in that community, they feel like they have the power to change something in their community, right? That they feel accountable to their neighbors, and that they feel like they have the tools to meet their needs, whether those tools are material resources or leadership tools and engagement tools. Also, I talked about an earthquake, but I think we can also think about crises in terms of the political situation. And I think our hope as funders is that by supporting rural communities, by supporting mindful leaders in Haiti, we can end political corruption, we can end all political crises in the future. I'm not so sure, given human nature, that you can totally cut that off. But I have a lot of hope from the organizations that we have supported, who even in the middle of lockdowns, in the middle of blockades in their communities, they were able to employ tools, dialogue, in order to build bridges with their neighbors who were building blockades. They were able to build bridges with people causing violence in their communities in order so that everyone might move forward together in safety and in health. And I think for us, that's success, that's the impact. When communities have that rich connection and that rich care for themselves and each other, and a broader vision for everyone, not just their community, but for all of Haiti. And I think for us, that success really hinges on being able to build meaningful relationships with communities. And so, Pierre, I want to ask you, from your perspective, how do we do that? How do funders build these relationships with the communities we want to serve? And what are some of the challenges that you see in the philanthropic realm?
It's where, for me, I come to this both as a funder, because of the experience of the Haiti Fund at the very beginning, and we continue to do that, but also having had the experience of running projects in Haiti and continuing to support those who do this work. The Haiti Development Institute, for us, where we don't run projects, but we provide the tools for people for those who do, to do it better and to transform communities. What had sometimes been missing is the level of partnership. I think philanthropy would do well to build the partnerships necessary with funders so that we can move beyond the projects and the outcomes or the income questions. Those have a place in the conversation. However, the reasoning behind those may not be right for the communities that we serve. The gaps, the problems we're trying to solve with philanthropy, oftentimes are not part of what philanthropy wants to study. And because of that, we tend to lose track of the people with lived experiences of the problem, to engage them in the conversation. So the only way you could do that is to build partnerships. And that's one of the reasons why with HDI, we make grants, but our grantees are not necessarily grantees, they are our partners. Because we believe that with that, it engages a different type of conversation, and it also begins to provide the space for the proper conversations to take place, whereby people have a chance to bring forth their issues, and not just in the way that this is my funder I'm reaching out to, but also in a way that this is a partner, we're in this together in some ways, and we're able to adapt and innovate together. The other thing that I think could help is we need to provide communities with the tools and resources that could help them. Sometimes developing a project that would solve maybe an education project is important. However, sometimes connecting that partner with an outsider or another partner from elsewhere or from the same area is just as important. Sometimes it would be a tool that we'll need to teach them to use, That may be the difference. And then the other thing is identifying that the problems are vast. To really solve them, it requires commitment, and it would also have to be a patient commitment, so that we can really build the kind of partnership that can begin to provide transformation in those communities, because we're talking about communities that where you have people with stake and roots in them, but also those are the same folks who have been under resourced for a long time, and they're dealing with problems that have been there, that have been very chronic and also there for a long time. So it's hard to try to solve it in the moment. And I think those are lessons that philanthropy could do, and using them would be able to do things that we don't usually do, get out of our way, and do things, help people do what they do. For example, one example, in Haiti would be, how do you help? Capacity building is key if you want to work at the grassroots level. Uh, Maybe there is a need for a capacity building fund. Maybe, and knowing Haiti is prone to disasters, maybe there is a need for a disaster relief fund that could also provide fund, not just money, but also provide resources for coordination, for planning, for everything before disasters hit, so that when there is a disaster, whether it's a hurricane or an earthquake, there's some things moving. There are some institutions locally that have been built for to deal with that, so that the interface would be much different, and we wouldn't have the chaos that we tend to see in country right now. So these are the things that I think, and through partners like the Vista Hermosa Foundation, I think we're beginning to see a lot more attention placed to that. And in the long term, though, one of the questions I have is, how do you look at building strong, healthy communities as a foundation with your grant making, but also thinking about the fact that you work with, for the most part, public servants. I mean, servant leaders.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to a lot of what you just said, Pierre, is first listening to communities and getting out of the way and getting our ego out of the way, really, right? That like what we're doing is letting the grant serve the community, not the other way around, right? And so being able to really listen to staff who are listening to communities, right? The people on the ground, and meeting their needs, both for material resources, but their needs for community, right? These public servants, these servant leaders, these staff people, they also experience the traumas that the communities that they're serving experience. And whether it is working through a pandemic or responding to political crisis after earthquake, after hurricane, these folks need our companionship. They need us to come alongside them as well and to provide resources for their well-being. And I think part of that is, like you said, thinking about long-term, thinking about multi-year grants, thinking about bigger support that creates security for these organizations, but also preventing competition between organizations, really having movement building such that people in different organizations don't feel like they're competing for a small pot of resources, making sure that folks feel like they have what they need to do the work, and that they can come to us when there are challenges, that we know things don't always go right. We know that there are road bumps. We know that there will always be challenges. And so we want to build relationships where organizations can come to us and staff can come to us and say, look, we're facing this challenge. And I can say, oh, you know what? Have you met Pierre? Like, let's get you what you need. Let's build these relationships and these movements so that not only communities are strong, but staff people, servant leaders, feel like they're also in community, that they're also connected to a larger network. Yeah, so I think that's kind of my thought on that.
Oh, that's refreshing, really, in terms of a point of view of a foundation, the way that philanthropy could actually be an accompaniment to communities. And on our end, we're certainly happy and honored to be part of, to be in partnership with the Vista Hermosa Foundation, and we're looking forward to having these kind of conversations and hopefully having more of these convenings. So I certainly look forward to having them in Haiti with partners in the mix for the long term. So I thank you for this conversation, and I definitely look forward to have to much more of that type of engagement.
Same. Thank you, Pierre, for your leadership both here in the United States and in Haiti.
Thank you, Jan.